Typically, after a ceremony or a congress or a meeting, there would be burnings of the crops. There would be burnings of the plantation. There would be revolutionary action that would come after these ceremonies had taken place. The reason why it moved into a state of secrecy is for its survival in the Americas. The prisoners of war, the captured Africans that were forced from their homelands into chattel slavery, came with their traditions and they came with their gods. But when these Africans would practice their traditions, their prayers, their songs, and their dances, it often threatened the institution of slavery. Because within that space, there was a movement that the drums evoked. There was an understanding that this state of servitude, that this state of slavery was not their natural state. And so what you found in most places throughout the Americas, the drum at some point or another was banned. Voodoo will always exist. And voodoo is one name of traditional African spiritual practices, specifically from Dahomey, today known as Benin. People of African descent live their lives, whether they have become Christians or whether they're Buddhist, very much so we move in spirit. So whether or not the name of voodoo continues to be a part of the way that we live our lives, our connection to nature, our connection to our dreams, our connection to our ancestors is very much grounded in who we are. And so there is always going to be voodoo. Voodoo survived in Haiti because the captured Africans were able to see a certain syncretism that existed with traditional voodoo and Catholicism. Our connection is eternal. Our connection to our ancestors is always there because our ancestors actually exist even within our DNA. And then the other part is that in most families, there's a place of silence. And so even though within our families, the religion may have been practiced at one point or may still continue to be, there isn't an actual open conversation. It's kind of like those trees that are planted, in New York City sidewalks, right? But eventually the roots start to, shift and you can't really walk, the same way because now the roots of that tree have emerged. That's us here. We are that root. And so there's a place in which it can no longer be denied. So whether our families are Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witness, Catholic, agnostic, Buddhist, Muslim, our connection to our ancestors, our connection to our roots and our heritage will always be there. It's time for us to come forward. It's time for us to come out of hiding, which we understand why it had to be hidden during the times of slavery, right? During the times where Africans were held against their will and forced into servitude. We're not in that state anymore. Because a big part of how we live, whether or not people want to talk about it, is that we have dreams. And within those dreams, we have messages that are given to us. Often as children, if we had dreams of a deceased person, if we went to our families, if we went to our parents and told them, I saw Grand-mère. Grand-mère came to me in my dream. Most of the family is going to ask you, well, what happened? What did she say? Because there's a place within us that we know that there was probably a message. And the message is often given to children because children have just come from that spirit world. So they can often hear the message more clearly. Sometimes our families tell us, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody you had those dreams. Sometimes they're prophetic. And so there's this disconnect that we have within our body and our spirit within the world that we're living in. And so this movement for ultimate freedom is to be able to be in alignment, to be able to embrace that aspect of ourselves that at one time had to be hidden, that we should be able to just be who we are. The constant conformity, the constant place in which we have to assimilate and shrink ourselves because someone else is uncomfortable. In 2018, I think we're beyond that. But the first place that we connect to the Creator is really within our imagination. So if you could imagine your connection in the way that you perceive God, but then what happens if your imagination is policed? The connection to traditional African spiritual traditions allows us to connect with a narrative, with a mythology where we as Black people are part of that. We're not separate from it. We're not enslaved in a place of serving our masters. We are the masters. But we're submitting to an imagery, to a concept that we're not part of. Where are we in the world? Where are we? How do we move? How do we create? How do we thrive? Our lives should no longer be about survival, right? There's a narrative that continues to be pushed on Black and brown bodies that we're still here just to survive. No, we're here to thrive. We can be in any tradition. The reality is that there are millions of African Black and brown bodies who are Christian. But if you go and visit those churches, if you go and visit those sacred places, they're not at all like the way that you may find other traditions, because the essence of who we are, how we connect to spirit, is always present. You can take us out of Africa, but you cannot take Africa out of us. It's being able to be open to the natural elements, to be able to connect and to hear those messages, to be able to walk with honor and respect. There was a need to be able to worship together. There is a remembering that is within the core of our existence as human beings. We all have memories. The memory for those of us who have descended of the slave experience is that we have to even go beyond that experience to reach that other knowing. Living in the Americas, the continued narrative is that we were slaves, but we existed before that. And so at that ceremony, at that Congress, what Bookman evoked was a remembering that this is not all that we will ever be. So Bookman was one of the Hugan, he was one of the leaders of that Congress that happened on August 14, 1791. And in his prayer, he basically tells to everyone present that we have to throw away the image of the white man's God. For many, some feel like, well, there were deals that were made with bad spirits. There was a deal that were made with the devil. There was a preacher who said that during Haiti's, the tragic earthquake that happened in 2010, that, Haiti had made a deal with the devil. The only devil that I ever knew were those Europeans who were a part of that horrific system of slavery, that horrific system that took people away from their home and forced them into servitude. And all of the writing, all of the media, okay? Haiti's liberation in the United States was known as the horrors of Saint-Domingue, okay? And the stories that were told was of this bacchanalia, these hedonistic Africans and all the horrible things that they've done, and now they're free, and now they're going to push their way into the Americas, and we have to make sure that they stay on that island. Even the story that there was a space where blacks were liberated was suppressed, because they actually believed that the Africans were subhuman. They never actually saw them as equals. Still to this day, if you look at the movement that's happening, whether you're looking at Black Lives Matter or whatever that's happening, you're looking at those early concepts that Kant, Hume, Hegel wrote about during Europe's Age of Enlightenment, that the African was half man, half animal. That still is what's promulgated today. That hasn't really changed. The fear of a black man walking down the street, the fact that the officer with the gun, who is in a position of power, will shoot before even finding out, what's in their actual hand. Amadou Diallo, 41 shots in the vestibule of his home, and he was holding a wallet. If you listen to the speeches of El Haj Malik Shabazz, known as Malcolm X, at the very core, Malcolm was speaking about that right for freedom. He talks about this double consciousness of both being Black and American, and not really being able to, in this country, to be able to be both and to be at peace. The civil rights movement in America is based upon dismantling that separation. The misrepresentation that is constantly in the media, we shift that. We shift that by recreating the image and by retelling our stories today. My intention is to inspire and encourage other artists, other humanitarians, other educators, other ministers, priests, priestesses, to push forward the bounds of freedom, to really open ourselves up to a new way of being and seeing, and to assist one another. Within the Haitian tradition, we say honor and respect. So there's a call and response where someone says honor and the response is respect. And so for me, that is the way in which I see freedom really be what in essence what it's about. It's about being able to honor and to respect. And if we're able to not only embody that in our lives, but to encourage others to move within that vibration, to be able to move forward in that way of being, we'll see a tremendous shift in the world. And that's my hope.